What did you first think when you heard that Dr. Ramsland was teaching Bryan Kohberger?
Um, I found out Friday after Kohberger's arrest. I actually saw somebody mention Dr. Ramsland on Twitter. And then I realized, there was a connection there through DeSales University. Um, like personally, my first reaction was just like my stomach churned and I literally physically got ill. I live with chronic PTSD. So anything unexpected can really throw me. And knowing that there was now a connection back to Ramsland and she connects to my father, it was just a lot because I've been pretty invested in the Idaho case. I've been keeping up with the news and the true crime community. I've been quietly invested in the case. And so I was pretty shocked to find out that there was a connection to Ramsland and potentially a connection to my father, but we're going to have to wait and see.
Do you think he may have had any sort of communication with your father?
Kohberger could definitely have had communication with my father. It's very common for criminology students and in general, the true crime community or just fans or people that are curious in general to contact my father via mail. And occasionally they do speak to him on the phone. Knowing how personally connected Ramsland is to my father, I would not be surprised if Kohberger had at least tried to write my father. We're going to need to see letters. I mean, potentially, if Kohberger has contacted my father, there would be letters in Kohberger's house and also in my father's jail cell. I do think if there's a connection made, the FBI definitely need to go speak to my father. I wouldn't be surprised if there's one, but I need proof. So, people just kind of saying, okay, Kohberger was influenced by your father. Well, obviously we know he studied my father in criminology classes. He probably studied him heavier since he had Ramsland as a professor. But we need to find out if there's a deeper connection. It concerns me. My father's had several mail violations and various violations, including cyber stalking me. So it concerns me that my father continues to have access to the public and the public has access to my father.
Knowing what you know about Dr. Ramsland, I mean, do you think she may have had an inclination that something was off with Kohberger because she studied your father so closely and has been studying serial killers for so long?
I mean, at this point, we need to believe that Ramsland, in good faith, didn't have any clue that Kohberger was capable of this form of deviance. I mean, I have questions about how did he get into the master's and PhD programs. I have questions about was he background checked? Did his supposed drug use or previous drug use was that taken in consideration? On the other hand, after being raised by a psychopath, I do know that they can hide very easily. That they can put on several masks and basically change how they're interacting with you, mimic you. Basically, a lot of times they're saying to you what they think you want to hear. So I would assume Kohberger held himself in a certain way in a professional educational setting. I'm kind of shocked how far he's made it into the criminology fields. But it's happened before. My father has a criminal justice degree. D'Angelo, Golden State Killer, he has one. Bundy, I believe, studied criminal law. So it happens. I mean, you can be an expert on psychopaths and they're still going to trick you.
Mm.
And honestly, somebody like Kohberger probably found that thrilling. I don't know to what degree where his deviance caught up with him, or to what degree he knew he was deviant or he was capable of this kind of act. But I'm assuming, based on what I know about like my father and other, serial killers like my father, they kind of get off on being smart and thinking they're smarter than everybody in the room, and they're not going to get caught. I definitely can see that being the case here with Kohberger.
What it's like to be a family member of someone who's killed. I mean, what can you say about what Kohberger's family? I mean, he's just a suspect at this point, but what can you say about what his family may be going through?
Kohberger's family is going through utter hell, I assure you. I mean, at this moment, we have no reason to suspect that they knew. We're going to have to wait on law enforcement, but innocent until proven guilty. So as of now, we have no reason to suspect they had any involvement, they had any knowledge. I know people are out there saying, well, what about the car and that the father supposedly drove home Kohberger from college? I get it. But I was home for Christmas in December of 2004, stayed in my father's house probably for like a week and a half. That was the last time I saw him. He was already kind of involved for several months with BTK Communications with the Wichita Police. I vaguely knew about that, but I was not, invested in it. I wasn't really looking at it. And my father would have been the last person I would have suspected. So I got the FBI knock at like around noon in Michigan. I lived outside of Detroit at the time, but it was like a detective team with, what I understand, like support from a SWAT team that went in and notified my mom, because they didn't know if my father had rigged the house. They didn't know what they were walking into. They didn't know if my mom was involved. So they needed to be safe. So I can understand the approach they took and why they did it at night. I also know, like, in my father's case, they highly suspected my father, but they wanted to confirm it with DNA. So they watched him, would set up like a car with detectives and kept an eye on him for days, surveillance, or 4 or 5 days before they arrested him, waiting on DNA to come back. They used my DNA. I was one of the first familiar DNA cases to catch one of these people. I might have been the first, I'm not sure. So it's a lot, and it's a lot for his family. It's going to be a lot. My father pled guilty, so we didn't have to go to court, but if Kohberger pleads innocent, then they're going to have to probably be witnesses in court, testify. You're talking years of therapy they're going to need, and like the quicker they can get into trauma therapy, the better. I made that mistake of not getting trauma therapy for 2 years. I thought I was going insane from the PTSD. So it's a lot. And they have every right now not to speak to the media, or the right to speak if they want. But I would recommend not speaking until at least the case is over, the trial's over.
Kohberger has indicated through his public defender that he is innocent, essentially, at this point. That's what he's saying. As a family member of someone in this situation, initially, did you believe that your dad was innocent, or did you immediately, look at the evidence and say, okay, I think he's guilty?
When the FBI agent notified me, he was clearly, he was like, your dad is BTK. It wasn't a question. I went into shock instantly. But I spent a while trying to defend my father, saying, hey, he's a Boy Scout leader, he's a church leader, he's a really good dad, he took me camping and fishing, he's basically like my best friend. Like, there's no way this man did what you're saying. And for me, 7 of the murders took place before I was born. So I didn't even know about the BTK cases until 2004, when my father came back up. in communication. So I'm asking, what are the dates? Because I'm trying to alibi him. I'm questioning what's happening. I said, you got the wrong guy. You had arrested the wrong guy in December. I'm asking for dates. And then he says 86. And then I remember that my neighbor lady down the street had been murdered in 85, and that it was a strangulation, and as far as I know, was unsolved. So I actually, as far as I know, turned my father in to be looked at for the 8th murder, and they called it, the FBI agent stopped and called it back. And then there was a 10th. So, but my father was confessing within 6 or 7 hours of that day. And so we were called by the FBI that night and told that he was confessing. And I literally was like, he's confessing to what? You're still just in complete shock and denial and arguing, with the FBI. And then they said they had found mementos that my father had taken from the victim's crime scenes inside my house. So that night I was still trying to alibi him. So I was researching the cases, trying to alibi my father, trying to remember when I was a little girl. I mean, we're talking about when I was 6, 7, the oldest I was 12. And I came across an audio tape of my father where he had been reporting a homicide in 1977 before I was born, a little clip. And in hindsight, I knew right away it was my dad. As far as I know, I had never heard that audio clip before then. I was protected. I was 26. I was young, married, protected, living outside of Detroit, Michigan. Honestly, if I had been in Wichita, still living with my parents, not married, I probably would have had my nose thick in this case, in the BTK cases. And it could have been a completely different ending to this story if I had been. So within that first night, then I had to start coming to terms with that my father had done this. And the next day they announced that he had committed these 10 murders. And I ended up going home and being with my family. My mom was in denial, you kind of go back and forth. You go through this grieving process. She said it was like like my father had died, like her husband had died. So everybody just deals with it differently. And then there's letters early on between me and my father. I'm basically saying, look, if you did this, if you're guilty, take the plea, spare the community, spare the victim's family, spare us. And he did take the plea. But my family didn't speak to the media. We were told early on by the FBI, don't talk to the media. It's going to make things worse. And I was like, make what worse? By the first day, I saw a video of you knocking on their door. Like that was my reality of cameras, in my hallway, in my apartment, people knocking on the door, trying to get interviews. I know you guys have a job. I get that now. Early on, I was so angry at the media. I was angry at the media, angry at the FBI. I just angry at everything. So,
yeah. I struggled with knocking on the door yesterday, but sometimes people
it's your job.
And they also sometimes you're surprised and they want to talk.
They want to talk. And that's a right of everyone to talk or not to talk, and we thought not talking, sort of being that good Midwestern shut down, quiet, private family was the answer. But I was suffering. I was dying inside. I literally was dying inside for years. And so when I finally did start talking, and I started with my hometown newspaper because they knew the story and they handled it well. I wasn't even supposed to start talking in the fall of 14. It just happened. But talking helped me in a way nothing else could. So even talking to you helps. And then talking about it, because it's so rare for somebody like me to actually be able to speak up and willing to speak up, that I've had thousands of people reach out to me since I've spoke up saying I'm helping them because they have criminal in their family, or they have mental illness, or they have trauma, or they've committed a crime, or they need to forgive somebody. So I never expected that side of it. And that's all grace, to be able to sit here and say like, hey, I've been there, and you will get through this and you will survive, and I've been there where my family is still accused of hiding things. It's been almost 18 years. And my mom is still accused of having hid things that she knew about my father. I mean, one man's actions 40 some years ago still affects me daily, affects his grandchildren, affects these 7 families, affects the community. Law enforcement that spent decades of their career trying to catch my father. I mean, do you know what that does to like a detective? I mean, and now you're talking about the Idaho murders and those young policemen that went in first. Do you know how much like trauma counseling they're going to need? How much care these families are going to need? Like the media will go on. You're going to go on to the next horror and the next horror, but there's so many people profoundly affected for the rest of their lives and lost. I mean, we lost 4 young people. We lost their chances of being married, having children, you know, being positive like influences on society. We just lost them for no reason other than some guy couldn't control his deviant behavior and didn't ask for help. There was nothing stopping my father from walking into a police station in January of 74 and saying, I'm getting ready to commit this crime. Can you help me and put me in a mental hospital? There was nothing stopping Kohberger from doing that. They just don't care. They're a psychopath. They have this line. We have lines. We have moral lines we don't cross. They don't have one, or it's very thin.
I mean, Kohberger being a criminology major and now getting his PhD, clearly interested in serial killers. Do you think the fascination, is part of the problem?
I don't know. It's so messy. I mean, you've got to train young minds to catch these guys, and you got to train them to catch them faster, right? So you're going to have to educate on these crimes. You've got to put my dad's in the textbooks. All these big guys are in the textbooks. You got to put them in there because you got to study them. But where is that line of where it becomes a fascination or obsession? And where does it become a line of trying to one up these guys and commit the perfect crime? That's in my opinion, that's where we're at with Kohberger. In time, we're going to be able to tell. But I feel like I have a question. Did he join criminology to want to learn to maybe become like a detective or a forensic psychologist, or did he go into it knowing he had deviant behavior? Because my father knew he was a deviant from childhood, according to my father. But we're talking about with my father, somebody that didn't get help in the 40s and the 50s. There was no help. There were no labels for these guys. Nowadays, what we would call my father saying he had a conduct disorder. Okay, so what's Kohberger's past? What you don't just walk into a house and do this. Now, maybe it was his first murders, in my opinion. Time will tell. But there's a lead up of behavior. For my father was breaking and entering, stalking, drawing these things, fantasizing about bondage. My father's a sexual sadistic psychopath. I don't think that's the MO here with Kohberger. But there's all this hidden behavior that leads up to this. And why in this day and age, with all the help that there is, working with these world-renowned, criminologists, why is nobody catching this? I mean, I don't know what that says if somebody is that deviant and is working academically with these people and they're not being caught. I mean, what chance do us regular people have? We don't really. I mean, if somebody wants to do this, they're going to do it, and that's something I had to learn. Was very hard to accept with my father. You cannot, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it, and hopefully you just catch them before they do it again. Because
I think just the fact, again, I mean, you said it already, but the fact that, he was studying with this professor that has this intimate, close relationship with your father, it's just very strange.
It bothers me on a lot of levels because I know how narcissistic, pathological my father is, and how he wants to be known as this really bad man. He wants to be remembered as that. Was Kohberger seeking that out to be the next Bundy, the next BTK? I mean, people are even saying, hey, Kohberger's got the initials BCK. Now the kid you can't blame him for what he was born with his name, but at some point did that influence him later on? Did he think that was neat? Did that drive some of this? I don't know. I mean, the only person that really has those answers is Kohberger. So it's gonna take after the trial if he's even willing to talk. And if he's honest about it, because with somebody like my father, you can't necessarily believe what they're saying. Like you have to take it with a grain of salt, unfortunately. It's senseless. It's so senseless. It's so senseless and pointless and devastating. I want to figure out how to stop it. Like, it's hard to be the kid of this guy and live with this, and then see somebody else go do this and wonder, did your dad influence him? Did your dad talk to him? Like, was he studying my father outside of academics? I mean, am I ever going to get answers to that? I don't know. And it doesn't matter. Thousands of people have told me it's not my fault that I couldn't have helped my father when I was alive as a kid, but I still carry it with me every day. So, I mean, I speak up and do this because I think I have some answers, because I'm really, really sick of people saying like psychopaths don't have feelings, that it's all just a shell. And that's not how I knew my father. And the reason they hide so well is because for my father, he could turn it off and on and show you what he wanted to show you. But when he was with me, he was my dad. He wasn't ever BTK. I don't know BTK. There's only one person that survived BTK. So I'm interested, does Kohberger sort of have like that, those shells and layers, who he's showing people? I don't know. We'll probably find out in time. Maybe. I'm just really, really, really thankful they caught him so quickly. Excellent work on Ellie's part. And nowadays with DNA, there isn't the perfect crime. It doesn't exist, not anymore. So if anybody out there is trying to do it, just don't. You're going to get caught and ruin your life and everybody else's life around you.